So hi, this is Todd. I'm sitting here with Holly, Senior Associate on our Resource Environment, and we're going to be talking about corporate sustainability today. Holly's had a lot of interaction with innovators, and I've been working with the corporates on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a good place to start is, what's some of the cool innovators you're seeing?
If we're talking about this, we should probably talk about the story.
Sure.
So what really happened? So what happened is pretty much 2019. There was a lot of commitments towards net zero or carbon reductions by 2030, 2050, and this absolute tsunami of all corporates jumping on the bandwagon to make these commitments. So making those commitments, they wanted to look for tools to work out where they are, where they need to go, and how to get there. So that's when you have a similar tsunami of innovators coming in and providing these tools, from direct monitoring all the way through to supply chain tracking, and then to develop sort of pathways reduction, as well as adaptation as well.
And despite this tsunami of tsunamis, we're not seeing them actually do a lot of things, are we? There's a lot of great innovation out there, but not a lot of corporates engaging that innovation.
Yeah, well, we're seeing a lot of investment in the industry, and then some really interesting partnerships as of this year. But in terms of those companies actually being effective, I don't think we've seen that evidence yet.
Yeah, I think on the corporate side, we've seen it's been the venture investing arms that have been looking at hopping on the wave and see if they can find some companies to invest in. And then what they do with it after has been the big question. Are they actually doing pilots? Are they working with these innovators to see what the impact is on the company?
Mm-hmm.
And some are, some aren't.
Yeah, what's been your experience of, I guess, working with corporates on the consultancy side? And I mean, have they used these tools? Have you come across any of them using these tools?
No, I think where it's more effective is when it moves away from the venture investing mindset to getting people from the operating businesses and figuring out how to actually engage the innovation to measure what the impact is going to be and how it affects those sustainability goals. So we see the strategy teams getting involved. Mm-hmm. We see a change, instead of having a venture mindset, being more of a joint development mindset. And we also starting to see a shift to new groups like a chief procurement officer.
Yeah.
A lot of chief sustainability officers have been looking more at reporting outwards and not what they're doing inside. Mm-hmm. So now we do see a chief procurement officer, because ultimately they get involved in buying everything. We see supply chain people getting involved.
Yeah, and I remember speaking to a lot of the innovators in that space of what makes a good decision maker when you're trying to enact corporate sustainability. And the big red flags for them were always, if they were put in touch with communications teams, then that's purely outside communications. And
you're going to end up in the sustainability report, and that's about it.
Yeah. Or on a press release where it needs to be real action on the ground and targeting those decision makers day to day. And I think also what's quite interesting when speaking to innovators on the adaptation side is they don't know who that is. Mm-hmm. It's a new role. It's it's new reporting, new decision, new chains of command. Mm-hmm. So having to navigate that can be quite difficult. What about what's your experience?
We see like, okay, a chief sustainability officer comes in, they develop a sustainability report, they set all these goals, then they talk about communicating how they're getting toward those goals. Mm-hmm. And it's usually the scope 1, scope 2, what's the easy stuff? Oh, we're going to buy renewable. Oh, we're going to do this. We're going to do offsets. And that's good for a little while until they realize they can only go so far. And then they need to start looking, what are the problems to solve? Mm-hmm. How do we actually reduce water usage? How do we change what we do? How do we recycle things? All these types of goals tied to the SDGs. And then that's when you start to see it move away from a reporting mindset to, okay, now we really got to get something done.
But you're really talking about innovation and them investing in innovation, being corporate,
right?
Being
how do we
strategic
we can't solve the problem ourselves, and we can't go to our big suppliers because they don't have a solution. Mm-hmm. So maybe we need innovators. We need innovative ideas.
Do you have any examples of where you've that's been really successful when working with a corporate. So it's been both the decision makers that have been the great mindset, and the project has worked, and the innovation has been influential.
Yeah, I think where it's been successful is when a dedicated team is set up that has a budget, and their goal is to work with the business units to find these unmet needs. Then they reach out and they find innovators, they bring them in, and they pay for a pilot. And a lot of times their biggest challenge is, how do they actually pay the innovators? What kind of a contract do they have? How do they get the legal team out of their way in order just to get on with a pilot? That's always been, it should be pretty easy, right? Let's do a pilot. Let's go through the setup. Let's do the sprint, agree what the objectives are. It should take a few weeks, right? It could be 6 months before you get a contract because of legal getting involved.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been getting involved with more of those post, we've made a decision on a company, now we're going to try and bring the pilot in and start it. And that process is way more complicated than I expected. What do you think are, I guess, the ingredients for success for this stage when you're trying to bring the pilot?
I think that the next evolution in the corporate is they develop a team that can address or be aware of the sustainability goals. They also have credibility with the operating units, and they can bridge that gap between the corporate point of view and the innovators, because they speak different languages. So they get experience, they learn how to navigate, they become champions for the pilots. And same time, you bring in a startup and say, well, okay, we're willing to do a pilot for 100 widgets, but how are you going to do 1 million widgets a week? Well, okay, I can't right now, but if we do the pilot, we'll find out the path to 1 million widgets a week. And corporate procurement doesn't always like that. They want to say, well, I don't want to work with you unless you can give us 1 million widgets this week.
That's, nice segue into my next question around. So after you've done a successful pilot, everyone's happy, it's reached the aims, how do you then take that to be business-wide or industry-wide?
Well, business-wide, they need to be able to take that as a success and share it across the company. Here's the pilot that we did, here are the results. And usually if you do well in a pilot, you say, well, in the pilot, we're going to see these gains. If it's successful, we can roll it across this part of the company and have these gains, and then industry outside could have these gains. And then they have to make the decision. Do we invest in that company? Do we buy that company? Do we become a long-term client of that company to give them long-term offtake contracts? Or do we say, you know what, it was a great learning experience, good luck guys, go on. And that's always a decision-making, not unlike an investment committee, but you review the results, you get the feedback and figure out, does it work for the company?
What do you see most happen? Is it the acquisition? Is it the investment? Is it the see you later?
Very rarely is it an acquisition.
Okay.
Because if it's good for that corporate, it's probably good for other corporates. And so they're willing to participate in it and help it scale. So I think there's a range. A lot of times they are willing to invest to help them grow. But we see a lot of other companies coming in, investing first, and then trying to figure out what to do with the company they've invested in. And that, I think some of the big corporates are beginning to say, well, look, we already own a part of these companies, we should do something with them. That's a little bit harder. It's trying to fit them into an existing business. So from your side, what are some of the cool innovations you've been seeing? What kind of companies trying to help solve these sustainability goals?
Yeah, so around corporate sustainability tools, you can really sort of split, I guess, into three. So you've got emissions monitoring or sustainability monitoring. There are other offshoots of that, water, biodiversity, etc. Then you've got climate risk analytics, so assessing the impact of risks, physical risk, litigation risk, transitional risks around climate change. And then the third bucket that we're already seeing and have talked about a lot is the carbon offset space. External investment in other projects elsewhere.
So with those tools, how do you keep those tools just being used as tools for greenwashing and sustainability reports versus actually having an impact on the company?
That's the
turn
$1 million.
The question back at you.
It's a $1 million question. Yeah, how do you avoid greenwashing? I mean, I think that's the really fascinating thing about doing this And I think the best defense a company has against that is having irrefutable data on exactly what your emissions have been, whether that's direct sensors, software that is very transparent, satellite data as well. It's very good for the direct monitoring for Scope 1. And then when you're sort of feeding back and having to report, etc., or you're reporting that to your customers, to your investors, you have these data points you can point back to.
Well, I think we're talking about two sides of the coin, right? So these corporates can use these tools to figure out what they are doing, what they might want to do, and then the stuff I've been working with is how they find the innovators to solve those problems. And Edward Deming, got to measure what you're going to change. So they need to measure it first, and then they need to come to grips with that they may need external innovation to help them reach those goals.
Yeah, I do think there are some steps before then and loads of existing technology that can be utilised. There's efficiencies if you're doing things like supply chain tracking, there's efficiencies that can be met, and at the same time you're achieving resilience of your supply chains in just mapping that. Very interesting space is tools for design for sustainability and end of life. So companies that can assess and compare different materials or constituent parts that go into making something. Say, for example, an electric vehicle, you can compare battery X to battery Y and really build up from the bottom up and design a product that is sustainable from the get-go, from the embedded emissions within that, through the life cycle emissions that will be used for operating that electric vehicle, and then end of life, can you recycle those materials?
And back to the design, being able to make it easy to take the batteries out of the car instead of having to make it difficult with a can opener and get them all out.
Yeah, I love all of the design for repair. I think that's fascinating and something that is quite rare in building a product these days. Yeah, it's difficult to find the incentives for a lot of these companies to do that, but if they're under pressures or if they've made commitments around recyclability goals, and I think EVs are a really interesting example because those materials are critical and finite. So the whole supply chain is incentivized to recycle those.
So we've gone from corporate sustainability to electric cars.
I keep talking about electric cars. I do think, though, just one point on electric vehicles, it is the best example of a circular supply chain that we have. And that's being really enabled by emissions monitoring tools and supply chain monitoring tools.
It's a great conversation. If you guys would like to come talk to us some more about circularity, about measurement, corporate sustainability, you know where to find us. www.cleantech.com.